Very, very warm welcome to our speakers. I'm Jerry Zeeler, the chairman of this meeting and the society. I'm not doing any work tonight except to be nice to people, which is unusual. And I'm going to hand over now to Stuart, first of all, and enjoy the talk, and we'll all talk together later on. Stuart, over to you.
Thank you, Jerry. I'll just screen share if I can. Right, does that come up for people?
Yep.
Yep, excellent. Right, well, as we say, as Jerry has just said, first of all, good evening. I'm Stuart Dennison that did the CCS Zoom talk on England and Wales railway maps. And originally it was going to be England, Wales and Scotland, and I realised quite quickly that you couldn't do Scotland justice by just tacking it on. Hence, we've got the one this evening. Equally, it is very much 300 years rather than 200, because the first line that we'll be talking about opened in 1722. Now, I'm delighted to be joined this evening in the presentation by Gilbert McCall. Gilbert's provided a good third of the material and from his collection. So what you've actually got is a combination of material that I've got, material that Gilbert has, plus obviously I've taken about a fifth of the presentation, screenshots from the NLS website. But most of it is not NLS. There's plenty of OS, but there's quite the majority is non-OS material. We're going to split the presentation between us. We're going to talk to you about the railway mapping of Scotland. We're both, Gilbert and I, right in the middle of Scotland. I'm in Surrey and Gilbert's in Bulgaria. But we're going to make a start, and I'll start with the first line in Scotland. I know that there is dispute as what's the first line, but this is the one where I like the evidence that supports it. And it's this one, which is the Tranent Waggonway of 1722. You're in, it opened in 1722, if I can get my little pointer going. Or not, as the case may be. Right, the little red splodge. It's from the coal shaft of the mine here at Tranent up to the coast, along the marked on the map as Wagon Road, to what looks like Kenzie, but I actually think is pronounced Kikini. But if I get any of the pronunciations of Scottish names wrong, just please forgive. Anyway, this is an extract from William Forrest's map of Haddingtonshire, which is East Lothian in later terms. That's from 1799, although the map was actually published in 1802. There's some interesting parts of this. This was a gravity line, so that the coal that was extracted you could take to the port. And I mean, a lot of it was for use along here for the salt pans at Preston Pans. So there's a gravity line the whole way down, so there was quite a bit of earthworks to actually achieve that. And so the idea being that you could send the wagons down with gravity and you could have horses to haul the empties back. The other distinctive feature, apart from this being the first one, because obviously it was a wooden one and wooden rails, I think it was 4-foot gauge because there was no standard gauge at that early time. The other interesting bit is I can't think of another example where you actually had a battle fought across the line. And that happened here, the Battle of Preston Pans in the Jacobite Rising of 1745.
Could we zoom in on that for a moment?
Of course.
Thank you, Stuart.
Sorry, I should have done that before. That makes it a lot simpler. So anyway, you've got this, the battle fought here. I mean, you do get interesting things of how one side had set everything up actually on the line of the railway. Whether that's true or not, who's to say? But anyway, I think it's a pleasant enough map, the forest one, and it's a bit of history of being the first one, and it's another bit of history having a battle on it. So if we move to the next slide, this is obviously the same line, and again, if I could win one, this is from the John Thomson Atlas of 1722, sorry, 1822. And it's one, as far as Gilbert and myself are aware, there's only two railways, waggonways, railroads, whatever you would like to call them, that were actually shown on that 1822 map. It's the same run, the only difference, of course, being that the terminology is shifted to railroad. The Thomson Atlas obviously was published by Thomson's in Edinburgh, and the sheets of the atlas were differing scales and different engravers. The engraver of the Haddington sheet was S.I. Neal, who was based in the Strand. Carrying on with the same branch, the Tranent line eventually got taken over by the North British Railway in 1886. And this is the Edinburgh Berwick main line. So this little bit, obviously, instead of going to small boats on the Firth of Forth, you actually were far better off with rail connection. So the branch got extended. The whole of the route down to the port was abandoned. It was a conventional line from a junction at Preston Pans on the Edinburgh Berwick main line. So it was, this is from an extract on the Edinburgh and Glasgow District Railway Clearinghouse map. I think that when you get the district maps rather than the one of the whole of Scotland, it's 2 miles to the inch. I think it's very well laid out for the detail it shows, including distances down to a chain. I know you can always say, well, you take the length of a chain, then it depends what part of a station or siding you're actually measuring from or to. But nonetheless, I think it's very clear, and it's an extract. It's one of the Railway Clearinghouse ones that were drawn and engraved by J&W Emsley. So, if like me, you go back to the 1960s and you had the Ian Allen version of the pre-grouping atlas, which obviously was based on Railway Clearinghouse material and just adapted, it always strikes me as strange because the blue on the Ian Allen ones were always the Caledonian, not the North British. But it's the rivals, the North British, that are blue on Railway Clearinghouse maps. So now we're going to go further north. In fact, a lot further north, up to Brora, which is on the Sutherland coast. And it is, as far as I'm aware, the most northerly part of Scotland where you had coal extracted. The Brora line was an incredible setup. It was a wooden railway to start with and then had metal strips later, but it was 1 foot 8-inch gauge. And as we will see as we get into the next slide, it had a rather remarkable existence of over 170 years. Now, it was a horse-drawn line, about 2 miles, came from a coal shift. I've used this, which is an estate plan, the Inverbrora estate in the Sutherland archive. I've used it because the line altered in 1810, and the original line, there were very few. In fact, I've only seen this and another rather indistinct plan showing the original route, which is that was the original coal shaft. It went on an embankment and then on a shelf above the river across to here where you had the harbour, and this actually is the coastline, and there were salt pans. So the coal and salt theme that we had at Tranent, we also had at Brora. So the um, the line opened in 1770. Uh, it it wasn't wonderful quality coal, but one of the things that it did manage to do, they managed to dig up some dirt around the edge of the seam, which used to self-combust. So, as an enterprise, needless to say, it was not the most successful. So, if we move on, it closed in 1810, and then using this uh, with some rather indifferent stitching together that I've done of two 25-inch sheets. Um, the route I was just describing, that's the embankment, and it went across here. And then it was in the 1810s, moved to the other side of the river, coal shaft there, so that you had the coal going from there either down to the harbour, or the Duke of Sutherland at the time was particularly keen on exploiting Brora, trying to make it some sort of industrial centre, and the estate obviously more valuable. And this, which is shown on the 1904 maps, Woolen Mill, was established as an engineering works. So the coal was either going across over the Murray Firth by boat or up to the engineering works. Now, later, I mean, this is 1871, the Far North line came through, the line from Inverness up to Thurso and Wick. And here you had exchange sidings, but you've got to get it in perspective. The exchange sidings are alongside. This is 1 foot 8 and gauge, and obviously the rest of it is standard gauge. But it was an interesting little line of a couple of miles long. There was an ambitious attempt at trying to get steam power. It was never going to work because an adhesion line, this incline is 1 in 10. So what you ended up with is a line that largely was shifted. That's the only bit of the original line that stayed. The Duke of Sutherland owned everything in sight, so that, I mean, with this, they actually just connected the line to the bridge, the existing road bridge. But it's I think a fascinating one. Of course, it's too small to attract any of the grouping. It just went in its own merry way, and it only really ceased simply because the woolen mill ceased using coal in 1947. Its major market went, and that was the end of the line. So, with the exception of a few years in the 1810s, you had continuous operation, albeit on different routes, different alignments rather, from 1770 all the way to 1947. So quite a remarkable little line, isolated line, and one that started long before there's any connection down to the south. The next map, again, you'll never notice the join in the way I put these two together. The is again from the John Thomson Atlas in Scotland, 1822, and it's the Kilmarnock and Troon, and this one is of interest. Obviously, been an early line, 1812, and it's the only other line that I've found that is actually shown on the Thomson Atlas. The line, if I go in, is actually from Collieries and Kilmarnock the whole way down to the harbour here at Troon. The collieries and the harbour, the whole lot was owned by the Duke of Portland, so hence the line. It's a very early attempt, isolated, obviously when it started. I mean, obviously the sheets, the two different sheets of the Thomson Atlas, they would have been produced over different periods, and it's interesting that the same line and the Kilmarnock sheet is a railway and it's a railroad when it gets onto the Troon sheet. But I think that it's a particularly clear presentation. In fact, I'd say it's not only clear, it's got attractive use of colour. So I think full marks to Thomson in his 1822 Atlas. Next, I'm going on to is just an example of would have been a horse-drawn pit line. I mean, there are numerous ones in the Lothians. I mean, this is the Edinburgh and Dalkeith. It was drawn by James Jardine. That was for Stephenson, and that's Robert Stephenson with a V, and it's not Robert Stephenson as in George Stephenson's son. And there are lots of the NLS has got a good collection of Stephenson drawings, because there are numerous ones in the Lothians of lines from generally from pit to port, as it were. This one, obviously, you've got the collieries, you've got the coast when it is the Firth of Forth rather, and you've got the little matter of the city of Edinburgh at the other end. Typical of the maps of the time, sometimes these show, they can be quite lengthy ones. I mean, the longest one that I've seen of this sort of horse-drawn one is Glasgow to Berwick. And sometimes they're obviously they're drawn by surveyors and they include the gradient profile. This doesn't, but apart from showing the route, which you can tell it takes some pretty sharp curves, it's also it's got the distances along the route, so it's quite I think quite a tidy presentation, and you could see how, if it was trying to attract interest from directors or investors, why it would actually have worked for its purpose. So the thing, I think that's really is all I'm going to say on the very early lines. Now I'm going to hand over to Gilbert. I'm going to do the slideshow from this end, but Gilbert will do the commentary on the next part, which is the maps of the developing network of Scottish railways from 1845. So over to you, Gilbert.
Well, thank you very much, Stuart. As Jerry has said, I'm living in Sofia, Bulgaria these days, but I do originally hail from Glasgow, so I can claim at least a good connection with Scotland. Now, this first map here is produced by W.H. Lazars, and if you could home in into the Dundee area, Stuart, that would be good.
Sorry, which area?
Just north. Dundee and Angus is probably
Dundee and Angus, right?
Is where there are some lines to show. It's actually quite an attractive map, and there's a bit of color in it, but it rather on this size on the screen, you don't really see it that well. There were two other maps in the series. There was one for England, which includes Wales, and there was one for Ireland. You can actually see a copy of this on the NLS website if you're interested. They've dated their copy as 1841, and Stuart and I thought that was a bit early. And in fact, I'm sure of that now, because the NLS copy does not show the line from Dalry to Kilmarnock, which was opened in 1843, but this copy does. There must be several editions of this map, but how many, I don't know. And if you could point out Dundee with your pointer, Stuart.
Sorry. You're going to oblige?
Yes, if you look there, you will see.
It's not liking that. Sorry.
Oh, well, just expand it slightly. What you can see there is the several lines in Angus. There's the Dundee and Arbroath Railway, Arbroath and Forfar Railway, and Dundee and Utah Railway, with its extensions up to Glamis and Cooper Angus, which were all built during the 1830s, are shown on this map. But that is as far north as any railway lines are. So although it says it's a map with all the railways, that is not a great boast. Now, if we move on to the next one, and if you can expand that a bit, that gives you a better impression of what the map is like. It is rather more attractive than the overall showing of Scotland is. You'll see there that it includes the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway. Unfortunately, what they've described as the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway is actually the Slaminen Railway. But the Edinburgh and Glasgow Railway is there a bit further north, alongside the Forth and Clyde Canal. It's not a terribly easy map to read this, and as I say, I don't think if you're interested in the railways, it's not terribly easy to find them. If you look over towards the western edge of the map, you will see the Glasgow Paisley and Greenock line and the Glasgow Paisley and Ayr line, which were opened in 1840 and 1841 respectively, I think. And we don't really show this part of the map, but east of Edinburgh it does show the main North British line down to Berwick upon Tweed as a proposed line, and that opened in 1846. So I think that is the end points. I would say this is between 1843 and 1845, and that's why I've dated it as 1845. But it's an interesting. It's not an uncommon map, this, but certainly it's quite an interesting map showing the early railway development. Now, if you move on to the next one, Stuart. Now, this, I think at least, is an interesting map. This is a Board of Trade produced map, or at least they would have asked for its production. It's called Skeleton Map of Scotland. Skeleton map is not a term I'm sort of familiar with, but it appears to be basically a map which shows one thing and nothing else. And it was produced in 1846, showing the lines which had been deposited with the Board of Trade. Now, this is the map of Scotland. There is also a map of England and Wales and a map of Ireland and the series as well. And they're about, I think it's 4 or 5 miles to the inch is the scale. So, I mean, I've seen plenty of maps from the 1840s which showing sort of projected railways, but nothing I've ever seen that gives this level of detail. If you look at the map itself, again, it's not terribly easy to see in this slide here, but each line is numbered. And what I'll mention, I'm not going to go over all lines that are there. That would take all night and more. But if you look down south of Ayr, down past Girvan and down past Ballantrae, going down to Portpatrick, that was a line that was called, let me just get the name correct. One moment. Yes, the Glasgow and Belfast Union Railway, which is quite a grand sounding title. Now, all it was ever intended to do was to go from Ayr to Portpatrick. I don't think they had any particular intentions of trying to dig a tunnel under the North Channel. We leave that kind of idea to Boris Johnson a bit later on. But it is quite interesting, that line. I can say a little bit about it. There was an act passed in 1846 to authorise the line from Ayr down to Girvan with a short branch to Maybole. This was never proceeded with for the usual reason of a lack of money. And the railway did eventually get down to Girvan in the 1850s. What's interesting, actually, again, is the section of line south of Girvan is shown going along the coast past Ballantrae, which, of course, is not the route that was followed by the line down to Stranraer when it was eventually built about 20 or 30 years later. And what I don't know is whether that was what they were planning to do at that stage, or it was what the person who was preparing the map thought was the most logical route to follow. So I don't really know about that, but it's interesting that it shows a potential route down to Stranraer and Portpatrick along the coast, rather than going inland through Bar Hill, which the line does today. So if you move on to the next slide, you can see a little bit. Now, this is I obtained these 3 maps about 15 years ago, and what was a little bit strange was it didn't have any, the lines were all numbered in all 3 maps, but it didn't have any reference table on it, which made it rather less useful than you might have thought. And I didn't do much about that. In my usual idle fashion, I thought I must get around to see if I can find something later on. But when I agreed to take part in this talk, do you want to zoom in a little bit, and then you can just get an idea? I mean, it's of the kind of names of the different lines that were being proposed. The copy in the National Library of Scotland has this, and Chris Fleet very kindly arranged for me to get a copy of the key from that. Why my copy doesn't have it, it doesn't mention the fact that it was published by Arrowsmith, whereas the NLS copy does. It's a bit strange to me that they would go through several iterations. What I have, maybe some kind of checking copy or proof, I really don't know. But just to put it all in perspective, there were 118 different schemes in the Scottish map. There were 594 schemes in the map of England and Wales, and 88 schemes in the Ireland map, which gives you a total of 800 schemes being going to the Board of Trade in one session, which I think is quite an amazing number. Obviously, that's the height of the mania, and I'm not aware of any other maps like this produced in other years, but I think it's an interesting map to see what kind of schemes were being produced in more detail than you normally can do. Next slide, if you want, Stuart. If you zoom in a bit on this one as well, we can. Now, this is a map from 1871. I won't spend long on this. It's a Caledonian Railway map of Scotland, but it's not just the Caledonian Railway. I think it's one that fairly objectively shows all the different lines. I think you can see from that in the central belt, although the scales, it's a bit difficult to see here, the network was pretty well getting to the stage that one would recognize later on. And the main area here that's very much lacking in railways is the Western Highlands, because of course at that point the Callander and Oban Railway had just reached Killin. We got on to Tyndrum in 1873, so I think that helps to show the dating of it is fairly accurate. And you'll find up north the Cowloch branch only goes to Strome Ferry, and there's no sign of the West Highland Railway at this stage. But that gives you an idea of where the development of the network was by 1870 or 1871. And then if you move on again, and again, if you could zoom in there as well. This is the map. I mean, Ackworth's books on the railways of England and the railways of Scotland from late 1880s, 1890 are pretty well known. This is the map that was included in the Railways of Scotland volume. It's nothing. I mean, it's a bit over. It's a bit too crowded in my view, trying to do too much. And also, if you can just about see, if you look down the air, the Glasgow and South Western Railway is shown in light yellow, which makes it pretty difficult to identify. But it does give you an idea of the extent of the network at that particular time. And this is 1890, just after the Forth Bridge, take it from me, is shown there. And that this map dates from a book that was published in 1890. You'll notice if you go up to the top, Stuart, if you go up, you'll notice that in the best traditions of Scottish mapping, Orkney and Shetland are shown in a box at the top right-hand corner. The fact there's no railways there makes that perhaps slightly unnecessary. Okay, if we go on to the next one. Now, this takes us on to 1895, and yes, probably the one on the left, it shows the Highland network. It says Highland Railway Session 1895. Whether this was produced for their board or some legal purposes, I'm not sure. But you can see it shows the Highland Railway with its stations fairly clearly. The other railways are shown, but in a much more basic format. And if you go over to the map on the enlarged section on the right, you'll see that it shows it's at the time when the direct line into Inverness from Carbridge up to Inverness was being built. That was opened in 1897. It was promised by the Highland Railway in 1881 at the time when the Glasgow and North Western Railway was being promoted. If you remember the presentation I made on that a few meetings ago, and it only took them 16 years to get round to building it, but they did manage that eventually. And also, it does show this map here. It does show if you go to the Scotland section, yeah, it does show the line to Kyle of Lochalsh from Stone Ferry under construction, and also further down the line from Fort William to Mallig under construction as well. So again, that's us pretty well up to the 20th century in terms of the railway development. Now we'll move away from that in the next slide and go to the city of Glasgow, my hometown. Now this is called the Citizen City and Suburban Railway Map of Glasgow. I'm not sure if it's dated on the map, but certainly we reckon it's 1895. The Citizen was a newspaper. I remember it from my young days as the Evening Citizen. It wasn't a daily paper then. I think it might have been back in the 19th century. So this is a map that was produced by a local newspaper, and it's on Bartholomew's base. I think it's 2.5 inches to the mile. If you move on to the next slide, where we have enlarged the central area of Glasgow, and if we could zoom in on that a little bit as well. That's great. You can see the dotted blue line through Central Station. That's the Central Glasgow Central Railway, which was opened through Glasgow Central in 1896. And if you look further west, going up from Stobcross up to Maryhill, some of that line, which I hadn't realised so recently, was actually opened a couple of years earlier, which is presumably why it's not on a dotted line. And if you look as well, you can see the Glasgow subway is under construction at that time. It was opened in December 1896. And I think Stuart is pointing out the route of that now. So you can see fairly clearly there's quite a lot going on at that time. The lines, the North British lines through Queen Street Low Level were already in operation and had been for about 10 years. So that was really the network getting to the size that it remained, probably mostly until after the Second World War in the centre of Glasgow. There are modern reprints of this map available, at least there were a few years ago. I don't know whether it's still obtainable anywhere. And I think it's an attractive map actually, and one that is pretty clear, at least in terms of the railways. Street names are probably a little bit difficult for people of my age to spot, but that's true in most maps of this scale. So do you want to move on to the next slide? This is from the Caledonian Railway Engineers Office. How it reached my possession after many years, I have no idea. But it's quite interesting. It shows one of the less successful railway schemes at the turn of the century, which was the Paisley and Barrhead District Railway, which was was funded by the Caledonian Railway. And Stuart, can you just point round? It's the red line to the west of Paisley and the east of Paisley as well. And it kind of forms a sort of circle and goes down below the bottom of the map there to Barrhead. And that was intended as a commuter railway, although it does look as though a lot of the areas were fairly unpopulated at that time. But the development of the tram network, which is much more convenient, meant that although it existed for 50 years or so as a goods line, it never had any passenger traffic on it. And if you look at down south of Paisley on the blue line, or I think it might be green actually, from Potter Hill down to Barhead Central with a Glasgow and Southwestern line. I think the two lines were deliberately made at the bottom edge of the map there to be as difficult for each other as possible. It did get a passenger service, but it only lasted until 1913. And yeah, but there is something else that's rather interesting, which again I think is interesting about this map, and that is that the base. I haven't checked all the 6-inch OS maps it could have been from, but the base of the map round Renfrew is from one of the Renfrewshire sheets that was published in 1864, quite a lot earlier. And if you look round Paisley, you'll see it's slightly darker there than the rest of the map. And if you look over to the right-hand side, again, we haven't got all the map in, just for convenience here. It shows Glasgow. These are both been pasted onto the base map. And I was trying to work out where the Glasgow map, which OS edition it was, and I realized fairly quickly it's not an OS map at all. It's a Bartholomew 6-inch map of Glasgow on that point. Now, they produced for the Post Office Directory a map pretty well each year from the mid-1860s until at least the Second World War, and that has been pasted on top of an OS base. And the Paisley map, similarly, I looked originally at the 1912 Survey Atlas of Scotland by Bartholomew, the copy that's in the National Library of Scotland on their website, and I didn't find a Paisley map there, but I do have a copy of the 1895 edition, which does have a Paisley 6-inch map. And if you look at the northeast corner of the map, the Paisley map, yeah, again, Stuart is showing it out. A bit's been cut out there, and that is actually where the title of that map is. So this is a hybrid Ordnance Survey and Bartholomew map. And actually, what I've noticed is they fit together pretty. I mean, there are some things, if you look at the whole thing, are written twice, etc., but they actually fit together fairly clearly, and it's not immediately obvious when you start looking at it. So I thought that was an interesting hybrid map that had been produced, and presumably it was again there was a 6-inch revision of it, Renfrew, in 1899. It's probably too late for this, which is why they were using rather out-of-date maps, and probably they wanted something a bit more up-to-date for Glasgow and for Paisley. That's just me surmising what may have happened. But I think that's all of that section. And I'll hand back to Stuart now.
Thanks, Gilbert. We're staying with Glasgow. This time we're going underground with the district subway, as it was then called. This is Bartholomew's map of 1901, showing the full extent, because obviously it was just a one line and a more or less circle. So it's interesting. It's just put on a Bartholomew street map, but I think it's reasonably clear. It's a little confused, probably, in reading some of the smaller street names. It was produced at the time with a great sign of exhibition, which is the catalogue over here, the front cover of the guide to it, which is the International Exhibition of 1901 in Kelvingrove Park. And when the gallery had been opened, which had been funded with the first international exhibition they had, that's why you have this, and of course the subway had not long been opened, so the two went rather well together. It's I mean, at this time, of course, a cable line, and I think it's a pretty clear representation. But the next one is better, and that is getting towards, well, it is actually at the end of the cable hauling era.
Oh, no. The cable hauling stopped in the 30s. It was before it was modernized.
Yeah, sorry, you're quite right. I mean, that had gone when it was still, but before it was stopped to be modernized. Yeah. And this is an example of the carriage map that would have been just before the closure for rebuilding in '77. I actually think that is a remarkably clear map. It keeps the roads down to principal thoroughfares, and I think that you can exactly see where you are and get your bearings well. And being such a simple line, I mean, you don't need a diagrammatic. You can have something which approximates to the geographical accuracy, and that I think was a good example of how to clearly display the information. And then, if you go to the current online offering, it's that, which to me is well, obviously it's purely diagrammatic. It loses any semblance of geographical accuracy. Quite why you needed to have such a simplified version when it's just, it is a simple circle is beyond me. But I think that's a pretty poor shadow of the 1970s map. Now I'm going to move on to some ones of topographical interest, and we'll start. The beautiful new bridge of the Silvery Tay is the doggerel of McGonagall, as you know, who wrote his poetry for the original Tay Bridge, another one when the Tay Bridge fell down, and a third one when the new one was built. This is just the 25-inch map. I mean, obviously, it's much longer than a single sheet can show. And when I get this, if we go in a bit, what's interesting on this, I can't think of anywhere else where you can readily see it, anything a length like this. The little row of dots are the stumps of the fallen bridge, because I mean, what hadn't fallen down was cut back, and certainly at some parts of the Tay, whether it's all times, I can't tell you, but they'll be visible above the water. So you got the bridge, which did stand and still stands to this day, and the stumps of the former one shown. Now, the North British Railway, although it was terribly shaken by the fact that the Tay Bridge had fallen, was very keen on the Forth being crossed, the Firth of Forth, to the south. One proposal is this one. It's an 1880 proposal for a tunnel. Now, this would have been, had it been built, would have been an 8-mile tunnel, which is basically 4 miles at 1 in 75 down, about 200 yards, not much more, level, and then another 4 miles up at 1 in 75 on the other side. It sounds far-fetched. You've got to get it in perspective. It's at the time of the Severn Tunnel, 4 miles. It's at the time when we were looking to start the work on the Channel Tunnel, which did start from the Kent coast, even though it was abandoned before it got that far. So perhaps it isn't quite so ridiculous as it seems at first glance. What it did do was not only did it show this, although you can't see it through 90 degrees, it is the gradient profile of the line. That is Inchgarvie, which we'll come to on the next slide, because that never saw the light of day or a hole in the ground. But what did do was probably the most famous bit of railway infrastructure anywhere in Britain, which was, of course, the Cantilever Bridge of 1889. That Inchgarvie is here, so had the tunnel been built, it would have been off the right-hand side of this sheet. If we go in, what I think is interesting is just with the cantilever and the cantilever towers, is just how wide they actually are, how much they show on a conventional 25-inch map. So it's, I think, an interesting presentation, and of course, some might argue slightly over-engineered, but with what had happened at the Tay Bridge, you can understand why. And still a marvellous example to this day. Now, the other part with the fourth bridge I'll show you is a different, obviously, representation, which is from the railway junction diagrams, the 1922 edition, where it has a page showing the environments of the bridge. Obviously, apart from the bridge being under the Fourth Bridge Railway, the rest is all North British, north and south of it. And that'll be an Emsley engraving and drawing. Moving to a different one altogether, we'll start by looking at Charles Jopp, the engineer. This was either by or for the North British Railway. I couldn't tell you which, but I mean, obviously showing in red is the North British line. The interesting one, you won't, don't doubt you recall, but I mean, the map that Gilbert just showed of the skeleton map, and when he got the reference, it showed what would have become the Waverley route, carrying on through Langham, but obviously it went much further east before turning north. This also shows just how much the North British actually went into Northumberland, Hexham, Morpeth, and later Rothbury, and into Cumberland, into Silloth and Port Carlisle. This is where I'd like you to focus, which is Riccarton Junction. And we'll move to it now because this is the entire sheet, and you have, I'll expand it in a minute, but you've got the junction here, and quite an extensive one. What you haven't got in the entire sheet is a single road anywhere. This bit over here is just a continuation of this line going around in a U shape. This is the Waverley route coming up and going through more than 90 degrees. And if I just expand it a bit, what you actually get is engine shed, sidings, the station, turntable, the whole lot, the junction. This little railway village, none of which had any road access whatever. So it was only railway employees and their families. Everything that was built there would have to have come on the railway. And you often get exchange stations and where they are just sort of bare platforms, a platform and a shelter. Ones like Dovey Junction on the Cambrian line spring to mind. But this is, as far as I'm aware, unique in the degree of development at a station which is completely remote and doesn't have a single yard of road to it. Yeah, little footpaths around the houses that were built. But an extraordinary spot. I mean, obviously it was only picked because of the junction on the lines. It also highlights actually that the Waverley route, when you think of the west and east coast main lines, that the Waverley route across was a fairly circuitous route. It certainly wasn't a straight line. I mean, that's quite a curve in it. Moving now to another line, which is the West Highland. That was basically built for tourists and to get over to here, to Mallow, and to be able to get access to the islands, ferry access. Fairly inhospitable country, you have to say, coming through this part, around Rannoch and that. I mean, it's maybe very picturesque and at times of the year rather midge-ridden, but it's not got a lot else, and it certainly hasn't got too much in the way of people, so for the trade. So the railway company had a book, Mountain, Moor and Loch, produced in 1894 for the opening. At that point, it was nominally independent. It ended up as part of the North British. But when you actually look at it, that had the whole plan, and then it had sections with the drawings, obviously, of the scenic beauty of the areas around the stations. It's when you look at the distances between the stations, you see highlighting the point about the number of people in the vicinity, where you've got 10 miles, 9.5 miles, you've got huge distances between stations. It really was inhospitable country that they built it through. So It started, as I say, it got nowhere near the coast at this point. It only got to just beyond Fort William. Later on, we have examples here, and I'll explain those. This one is the guide of 1898, showing the expanded line to Arasag on the coast. And when you get there, the same tourist guide, but 1903, it has this rather curious. There's Malag, which it did end up, but it has got a rather curious sort of kickback route. We had a reversal here to go to Malag. That's pure invention, and nothing of the kind ever happened, as you can see in the map to the left of it. I'll move that up slightly. This is the from the 1924 OS quarter-inch atlas of Scotland. At Arasig, it just, I mean, obviously it's tricky because of all the hills in South Morra, but it just simply continued round and up to there. It does show some interesting lines, including lines south, proposed railway south, that's to Ballyphillish, which did get a railway, but didn't get a railway from here. It got the railway up from Oban, it was from the Caledonian. So there's some quite ambitious plans on that, some of which saw the light of day, many of them didn't. But it also shows that even if you get a guide, the contemporary guide, you can't always rely on their accuracy. The next part I'm going to go is a different part of Scotland, across to Argyll, and they're at Campbelltown, for the Campbelltown and Machrihanish. This was a narrow gauge line, 2 foot 3-inch gauge, which the only other 2 foot 3 I can think of in the British Isles are all in mid Wales. But anyway, this one did to bring, there was coal at Machrihanish on one side of the peninsula, and obviously it was used for keeping the fires going in Campbelltown. Campbelltown, I mean, you're going back to the 1870s, Campbelltown would have had access from the Clyde, but the access by the boats, I mean, they changed very considerably, upgraded, and very much to encourage the tourist as well as trade in the Edwardian period. So in 1906, if I can just blow this up, the original plan was just a simple one to a coal yard at the back of Campbelltown. 1906 decided to make, using the light railway order, making something rather more of it, and agree. I mean, that's the original line, and then it came on, goods line onto the quay, and the passenger service onto the edge of Hall Street, and that's the quay. And when you say onto here, I mean it wasn't a station. This was like a street tramway. It just dropped you off at the edge of the road. But it worked, and it was a pleasant enough line till the closure in the 30s. I think it's interesting too, the amount of earthworks that they actually did to achieve that. But the thing that I'd also point is just of interest in the railway is you know the bullet trains in Japan. Well, here you have the dodge the bullet trains in the Campbelltown and Machrihanish, because right across the line is a rifle range, which is an unusual feature, I would suggest. Alongside lines, there's plenty of examples. Right across them, less so. But it's interesting, 2 foot 3-inch gauge, and as I say, it was unfortunate. Had it limped on till into the 50s, then it's the sort of thing you could have seen actually getting preserved. So, moving on to the next one, we're now going different types of maps. The railway clearinghouse maps, I mean, you had the Scotland one and you had others with districts. So I gave the example before, the Edinburgh and Glasgow, Edinburgh and district. The railway clearinghouse map of Scotland was 7.5 inches to the mile. If we look at just taking, I mean, that's the one up from Carlisle. That's the Caledonian Main Line, the Glasgow and South Western Main Line. It works well when it is not too congested. When you get a congested area, even though this is on a larger, it's an enlargement of it, you can see, and I know that it's got the difficulty of being a segmented map and then in the middle, but I mean, that to me is just a bit of a mess. And it is, I mean, you could take numerous examples of the Central Belt where it is very difficult to read. But nonetheless, once you get away from the ramifications of the routes in the Central Belt, it works. So if we find what I've done with the cursor, looking at even the Edinburgh and Glasgow district map, that was the one that I showed before. That was 2 miles to the inch. That wouldn't work on certain areas where there were very, very closely congested features. And this is the Falkirk inset. And if you look at this lot with colliery, ironworks, foundry, ironworks, foundry, carrying on, foundry, brewery, and till the station, you've got this lot within 2 miles. I would argue that presentation, considering the quantity of detail it's in, is clear. I think it is well produced, and obviously the blue ones are the North British lines, and the sort of red browny colour is the Caledonian. The other thing on the, apart from the presentation material, obviously it's showing the distances to the nearest chain, is the Carron, because the Carron Ironworks, it's going back to originally had a waggonway between the ironworks and the canal and the river, and that's back from 1770, something like that. And of course, when the ordinary main line railways came on, that got used instead. But I think that's a good example how the detail works, but the detail only works if they get the scale right. Now we move on to the railway year book maps. From, I think it's 1898, the Railway Publishing Company every year produced a book on all the railway companies in Britain, and also in quite a few countries abroad. And this is just taken from the 1904 book. And what was included with all the major companies had a map, and all the 5 main companies in Scotland, the North British, the Caledonian, Glasgow and South Western, Highland, and the Great North of Scotland, all had their map shown. Very small lines wouldn't do. But when it comes to I think it's quite interesting, although the scale is going to vary between different maps, it gives a good indication of the principal routes and also the ownership, because a lot of Glasgow and South Western stuff had joint ownership of lines here and across. The Stranraer-Port Patrick route, most of it was jointly owned, including by the not only the Caledonian, but the English companies like the Midland as well. And I think that's you know, you see these all the time on eBay, and for the life of me, don't ask me why, because they're very common. But I mean, this is not an eBay job. This is coming straight out of the 1904 book. 2 more maps from the same year, which I thought were interesting, were the fold-out plans the maps they had for the Caledonian and the North British. These are broadly to the same scale. They're not exactly, because I mean that's Stonehaven, Carlisle's here, and Carlisle's a bit further down. But what it actually highlights is it's very interesting to think, because of the headquarters, Caledonian, it's all around Glasgow, the North British all around Edinburgh. what it actually shows is it's anything but. I mean, if you take the Central Belt and areas like Fife, where you've got pretty well a North British monopoly and nothing from the Caledonian. The Caledonian did manage to pinion in somewhat the North British. He got the Scottish Central and the Scottish North Eastern, so that it was able to really let the North British. It got to Dundee and it did get to up to Aberdeen, but only by sharing running powers with the Caledonian. And on the, if you take this as a traditional East Coast, well, it's as East Coast, it actually goes to Malaga. And this is the West Coast, you think from Glasgow, the Caledonian, yet it goes to Aberdeen. So I think that's quite a nice, simple drawing but of the network of both those two lines. Riccarton Junction is there, which is this, of course, is the Waverley route, and this, although it stops at Berwick on this because that's the end of it. I mean, obviously, it's the East Coast main line continuing with the North Eastern. So now I'll hand you over for a run through the railway companies over more than a century, starting with the Caledonian and over to Gilbert. Thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. Yes, what I'll show you now is a selection of maps, basically from timetables. I'll start with the 5 pre-grouping companies. The timetables there tend to come from the period immediately before the First World War, because that's what I had copies of. And then we'll go through the grouping and on to BR times. And I'll leave it to you to decide whether the maps get better or worse as time goes on. So the first company here, and we also show the front covers, which are quite interesting in their own way. Caledonian Railway timetables. This is from summer 1914. This is the southwestern section of the map, and I'm not terribly. Do you want to zoom in a little bit on the map, Stuart, if we can? I think there's far too much detail that, away from the railway lines and small villages and things like that, which make it harder to follow. There's some other maps later on which I think are much clearer. And once you get to Glasgow, good luck with trying to work out where the lines go there. It's just, basically a spider's web, and you can't really see, you can't really make much sense of it. But if you move on to the next slide, you'll see that's the map of Scotland. I don't think we need to go in any further on that. It's from the Caledonian and London and Northwestern map. I think, I'm not sure if the English system was in the back of that or not. It was, yes, yeah. Okay. So that was obviously showing their lines, and it's in the same style, thick, heavy black lines, or the Caledonian Company, but not that readable or artistic in its impression, at least as far as I can see. So if you move on to the next one, you'll see this is the North British Railway timetable. The cover is quite, you've got the Forth Bridge, you've got scenes from Glasgow and Edinburgh and other towns there, so it's quite an artistic cover. I think the map is a much more effective one. There's a map of the whole of Scotland, but this is the Central Belt part of it. And again, if you'd like to zoom in, I think we can see, I think it's a lot clearer than the Caledonian Railway map was. Perhaps possibly you could say the system round about Glasgow is not as complicated, which maybe makes it easier. But I think that's quite a legible map. And the treatment here of the Glasgow and Southwestern is rather fairer, I think, than the Caledonian. Caledonian lines are there, but they are practically invisible. And this is one of the things, I suppose, just commercial reality that we're getting that. But I've got some more extreme examples of that coming to show you with some of the other companies. And if you go to the right-hand side, there's an inset of Edinburgh and Glasgow, which again helps to clarify the network in those areas. if you move on to the next slide. This is the Glasgow and South Western Railway one. And if you move on, if we could look at the cover first of all, I think that's quite an attractive cover, maybe because I'm interested in shipping and railways. And this was one they were using immediately before the First World War. This one here was, July and August 1912. And I did a little bit of research to see if I could work out what the pictures were. I think the ship is the Juno of 1898, which was a GNSW ship, obviously, and it spent its entire career, more or less, on the excursion services from Ayr, and apparently cost £27,000 new, which makes the recent Calmac phase look quite expensive by comparison. Now, as for the engine, I'm not your expert on spotting engines, but from what I can see, I think this may be two 460 engines were produced in 1911 by James Manson, and they were quite well regarded, and I think it's one of them that's in the cover there. But if someone else can correct me, that's fine. And if you want to move over to the map, it shows, again, I think it's if we can move over a little bit. Yes, that's that. Again, it's a good deal clearer because there's not so much background noise as with the Cali map. It does show other companies more clearly in northwest England, up in Cumbria, than it does in other parts of Scotland, presumably because they weren't competing with it in any way. I mean, you can find the Caledonian Railway West Coast Main Line in this map, but it looks like a branch that has two perhaps trains a day sort of style. So it's deliberately downgraded. But to be fair, I suppose they were showing the GNSW services, and that was the main purpose of the map. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say on that one. If we want to go on to the next one, this is a Highland Railway. Well, it's fairly obvious. It does say it in large letters. Covers pretty unimaginative in the sense of it's just letterpress. The map is not. If you can zoom in on the map a bit, I don't think the map is very impressive. It does its job, basically, I could say, but it's not a particularly impressive or clear map, I don't think. And if you move back over to the cover, down at the bottom, you'll see at the bottom, and bear this in mind for the next map, the only direct route to the north is via Dunkeld, but not everybody necessarily knew that. So if we move on to the Great North of Scotland map, again, the map itself on the right-hand side is just about acceptable, I think. It does show they were quite one of the companies that ran quite a lot of bus services after 1900, and it shows these routes on it as well. But it's not a particularly inspiring map. But the more interesting map actually is the one on the timetable cover. And if you could zoom in on that one, you'll see it says there at the bottom that the routes to Inverness in the north via Aberdeen are the same fares and rates as via Dunkeld, which seems to, I think they're on a loser on that particular one. But if you look at the map, I mean, you may think things like fake news and alternative facts are something have been invented in the time of Donald Trump. But if you look for the Highland Main Line from Inverness to Perth, you will find it's somehow or other not there. And this is over 40 years after it was built, so they can't say it's just a new line. And they show the Highland lines north of Inverness and the connections from the central belt, but the Highland, and you can see the line down to Boat of Garton, the Great North of Scotland line just ends there. It would be a strange place to end a line if it didn't connect with something else. And if you look a bit further up, you'll see from Keith to Elgin, that which is now the only line between Aberdeen and Inverness, that's been missed out as well. So there's obviously a little bit of politics in the creation of this particular map. But anyway, I thought it was quite interesting, and I don't think too many people were fooled that there wasn't a line up through Pitlochry. Oh, and one just before, yes, if you look at, no, just go back. If you look at the Murrayfirth coast, along the Murrayfirth coastline, you'll see the village. Good luck to you. I was trying to, with my glasses and a magnifying glass and a bright light put on it, I could hardly read the names. So I think they were pushing their luck a bit with that one. Anyway, the next slide. This again is from one of the Great Northern Railway map. Again, it's just of interest, and it's showing obviously that it's there the East Coast route, and they show the connections into Scotland via the North British Railway, and the further north, the Highland and the Great North are also there. But there's very little shown of the Calais or South West, because that was not the way they were wanting people to go. But that was certainly one of the maps in their timetables. So do you want to move on again? Now, most of you are probably familiar with, well, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Bradshaw's Railway Guides that were produced monthly from the 1840s onwards. And there was a map in each one of them. I'm not a great fan of these maps. It doesn't look too bad there when you have this part of northeast Scotland, because it's not terribly dense. But where the network was very dense, and also the fact that the paper quality is absolutely atrocious, they were not very easy maps to use. And this is an example, part of the Bradshaw's map from October 1894. Showing the area immediately north of Aberdeen. One thing that does occur to me is that they number each timetable or each page, I think, of the timetable. When you think about it, the Bradshaw's was expanding, certainly through the latter part of the 19th century. And the person who had the job of renumbering these lines, that must have been a pretty awful and boring job they had, because it would change pretty much, maybe not monthly, but certainly very, very frequently. Do you want to move on to the next one? Now, yes, post grouping. This is the LMS map from 1938 timetable. It's the Southern Scottish map from that timetable, which is section 8. They had quite a large selection of maps shown in the timetable. You can see, I think, the ancestry of the Caledonian map with a fairly heavy black line, although what they have done is they've got rid of a lot of the background noise from it. If you want to sort of zoom in over Glasgow and Edinburgh, that would, yeah, I mean, it's still pretty crowded, but I think outside those areas, it's a good deal more legible, that map, than what they had when in Caledonian days. Do you want to move on to the next slide? The other one, LNER, 1938, very different style of mapping there, and it's very different style from any of the pre-grouping components of that company. This is a pure timetable map. The fact that it doesn't show any services in Southwest Scotland, I don't think is intended as a slight to them. It's just that no LNER services ran over there. Similarly, the Perth to Dundee line, at least north of the Tay, is missing. Again, it's very much a map that relates back into the timetable pages themselves. And if you want to move on to the next slide, this is an inset Glasgow and Edinburgh district. What struck me about that is, I mean, it's very diagrammatic in nature. I think it has been influenced by George Dow, who did quite a lot of maps for the LNER and the LMS as well, late 20s, early 30s, and may well have influenced Beck to some extent, although there's no evidence, according to Andrew Dow's book, Telling the Passenger Where to Go Off, that his father ever produced any for Scotland. I think the kind of straight lines generally suggest that kind of influence, very much a diagrammatic approach to the mapping. So if we want to go on, we now get into British Railways. And the map there is very much the iconic BR map I remember from my childhood, which this is the passenger timetable for the summer 1952 timetable. And at that time, from 1950 onwards, there were maps in the Scottish region timetable. And at that time, they just had one map, which was the whole country. And this is the Scottish section of it. If you want to zoom in, Stuart, probably. I'm just conscious that your time is running on here. You see, I think, gives a pretty good impression of the network. It didn't cover pretty well. It's only the principal stations it showed. But from 1955 onwards, there was another map in the back, which was Scotland alone, and it had a much wider, or not wider, a much more detailed coverage of the lines in Scotland. You'll see it's still, at that time, was still a pretty big network, although some lines that had been closed a year or so before, like to Aberfoyle and up to Macduff, are still shown, although the lines were closed by the time of this timetable. Do you want to move on to the next? And this is the first of the large size Scottish region timetables, 1965-66. And the map there, I think it's a rather sad one as far as I can see, because it's really the last map that could be produced that showed a network in Aberdeenshire, north and slightly west of Aberdeenshire. The line to Peterhead was already closed by the time this timetable started. The line to Fraserburgh was closed later in the year. The Ballater line at the beginning of 1966, and the lines down the Spey Valley from Dufftown down to Abbeymoor and Forest down to Abbeymoor, they were closed later on in 1965 as well. And it just left the Murray Firth coastline and the one through Dufftown, which succumbed in 1968. So really very shortly after that map, there's nothing left apart from the main line from Aberdeen to Inverness of the Great North of Scotland system. And if you think about just, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you probably find of all the major British railway companies, the Great North of Scotland probably has the smallest percentage still operating, and the Highland probably has the biggest percentage, because the Great North of Scotland was all branches and the Highland was all, at least in inverted commas, main lines. This is the map, British Rail timetable. I don't know what the cover is particularly. That shows 1988-89, really pretty at the nadir after Beeching, and very much the network as it remains today, although there have been some extensions since then. And this is, when they reopened the line through Glasgow Central level in 1979, they produced, these are kind of London Underground style. It wasn't trifold, it was a bifold little pocket maps they produced, which I think is quite nice. It's got a 60-degree angle rather than 45, I think, to make them able to squeeze it into a smaller space. But that's, I think, produced at the time when the Argyll line was opened and the Underground was reopened in 1980. But it shows the line. It shows the line through Paisley Canal to Paisley Canal to Kilmacombe, which were closed at the beginning of 1983. So I think probably late 79, early 80 is when that map was produced. And I think it's quite a clear map showing the network as it was at that time. Do you want to move on, Stuart? Yes. I was going to say, if any of you have a nervous disposition, you should look away before I showed this map here. I hesitate to say zoom in on its Stuart, but I suppose we have to. Now, if you look over on the left-hand side, you'll see an island called Skye. I thought it looked like a sausage, but Stuart said more like a Weetabix, so I think is a fairly accurate description. So for those of you who didn't know that Skye was shaped like a Weetabix, you do now. Now, why they use this kind of I mean, the network is not so complex that they couldn't have something slightly more geographical than this. And I think of all the maps we've shown tonight, that is the one that is probably my least favorite. It does show the stations and vaguely how they relate to each other, I suppose. And if you want to go on to the next one, it does show from that. This is on the ScotRail website at the moment, if you feel brave enough to look at it. This is the central belt inset rather. And again, if we could zoom in on that a bit, I think, yeah, you'll see that actually works reasonably well, I think. And one thing I was looking at, just trying to work out, I would say on this map, about 60 of the stations have been opened or reopened since 1970, which shows that actually there has been quite a lot of growth in the network in the Central Belt. But we don't really have time to go into that in any more detail just now. So for the last part of it, I'll pass you back now to Stuart.
Thanks. I'll move on hopefully swiftly. We go into one or two tourist guides. This is an interesting one because Black's Iron Highway, this is from the 1850 version when just after the line had actually got to Glasgow. And in fact, this is the Garnkirk Railway. I'll blow it up a little bit. So this isn't the route. I mean, obviously Central Station's a long way ahead. So there are various routes into Glasgow originally, but the Caledonian one had this one in to start with. It's quite a pleasant map, obviously, as you can see there, published by Adam and Charles Black for Edinburgh. It shows also that from Carstairs Junction, the line to Edinburgh. Over here, we should mention is that round here you'd have Milton Head, and of course the birthplace of General Roy. But coming back to the railways, you had this quite simple, and I mean it did go the whole way. It's 14 panels long, and it does go the whole way down to London, and of course with various shifts in orientation, because you're not going to get a long thin shape to take you the whole way from Glasgow and Edinburgh to London. It also had within it quite a pleasant little setup where it showed strip maps, so it would show in greater detail the routes as you come out, the distance in this way coming up from Carlisle, that way down from Glasgow, and what there was on either side. So that if you're at Symington, you're looking out one side, you can see Dungavel Hill one way, and you look the other way, you can see Lamington Village. So it's pleasant enough presentation, and it's I mean, although it's in book format, you can see the attraction to the traveller moving on the newfangled Caledonian Railway, taking you the whole way up to Glasgow. Another one that, when you get into the Edwardian period, is the 1908 Caledonian Railway tourist map. Rather neat. It's about 5.5, 6 inches by, say, 2.5 leather binding. So it really is a pocket map. I mean, it's got various itineraries. It does include other lines. I mean, it includes the things like the North British, and it doesn't include the North British where it thinks it might be a bit too close to Caledonian, but odd areas of the Highlands, fine. It obliterates the main line of the North British from Edinburgh down to Berwick by putting on this side a nice map of the West Coast route between England and Scotland. but it's got a tour itineraries. No, I thought it is quite a good, well, basically on a Bartholomew's map. Here's a dreadful bit of a pun on Burns, but as a postcard, the Midland Railway, obviously of England. The Midland Railway was very proud of its connection with the Glasgow and South Western, and obviously into Burns country at Kilmarnock. And here it's got the Midland Scotch Expresses. Sorry if you get this thing, Scotch is a drink. The terminology in the railways at that point was very much not Scottish, but Scotch. And the Midland Scotch Expresses give direct access to the homes and haunts of Burns and Scott. Well, the Midland Railway didn't give you access to either. Kilmarnock, which on this one, because of using straight lines, Kilmarnock manages to be southeast of Glasgow, which you won't see on too many maps. That obviously you could get there for the Glasgow and South Western from Carlisle, and up this one to the haunts of Scott and Abbotsford, you're on the North British, on the Waverley. But it's an interesting little postcard, 1907. Coming into the Big Four era, you had this, which as a railway map fails, it's an LMS map. In fact, it's interesting because of the shape of the map, but I mean, you do have to say, as a means of conveying information, it leaves a lot to be desired. But this was making the centre of the world here at Gleneagles, with the Gleneagles Hotel, which I think was 1924. It was in the 20s when it opened, and very proud. And so if you went and stayed at the Gleneagles, this is how easy it was, to get around the whole of Scotland. Now we'll come to the Stephenson collection. This on the left is an 1840s map showing the Kilmarnock and Troon that you saw in the Thomson Atlas earlier. And on the right, the little model is a silver model of Stephenson's engine, which was short-lived. It's about 1814. It's long before the Stockton and Darlington, and that was tried with steam power on the Kilmarnock and Troon. It didn't work terribly well, not least of which because of the cast iron rails, probably too heavy for it. And the Duke of Portland owned the collieries, owned the harbour, and the then Duke of Portland in 1914, 100 years on, his silver wedding present was one model of the engine. What happened to the model, I don't know, but it's rather an attractive silver model. So that you've got the Stephenson connection, even though obviously you won't find too much of Stephenson in the railways in Scotland. And then we're going to finish on a high note. We will do if I hit the right thing. Excuse you, sorry. That's finishing on the high note, which is One Lock Head, which is the highest point that any of the adhesion railways reached in the whole of the British Isles. 1498, higher than the Highland Main Line, and that is from a 1-inch map. It's 1902 revision, but actually it's interesting. You're in the Lowther Hills. This is a line that was a light railway from Elvenfoot and the Caledonian Main Line, and it's around here is the highest point anywhere in Britain on the railway system, ignoring the Rackway up Scotland and the modern one in the Grampians. And the original survey of that 1849 to 59, but I suppose revision wouldn't be needed too much when you're surrounded by those hills. So on that, thank you for your perseverance. I'll hand you back to Jerry and any questions, and thanks for Gilbert for his contribution too.
Well, thank you very much, Stuart, and thank you very much, Gilbert, for yes, I can see applause coming through on the reaction button there. So thank you very much. And most people have stayed to the end of a dramatic show of over 50 slides, I think. And thank you so much. Very, very interesting indeed. I don't want to renege. It's 9:30, but any questions and answers? Can I just quickly pay tribute to? Forgive me. This was from Peter Jones earlier on. He sent a chat message noting that Abercorn, near Queen's Ferry, where we had one of our earliest map examples, was where James Watt lived, and he was funded by the Duke at Hopetoun House to conduct experiments on the development of the steam engine boilers. So there you go. Thank you, Peter. I don't know if you're still around, if you wanted to say anything further, but thank you for your input on chat. Does anyone have any questions? Rob Wheeler.
I was very interested to see the Board of Trade maps of 1846. I'd never seen them before, but I knew a certain amount about the involvement of the Board of Trade because it very much affected the railways through Lincoln. And what happened was that Parliament, being rather overwhelmed with the number of proposed lines that had been put forward, as deposited plans, which was the first stage of petitioning for an act. It sought the views of the Board of Trade on which lines should be favoured. The Board of Trade showed a singular inability to handle evidence. Basically, it formed a prejudice and stated its prejudice. So it came out with the splendid declaration that there was clearly no need to have more than 2 lines from London to the north. The existing line to Birmingham and the one to Cambridge would be quite sufficient for all time. And that is perhaps why the exercise took place in 1846 but was never repeated. On a different matter, you remarked on the excessive amount of detail on it was Caledonian, wasn't it? Caledonian map, which was also an LNWR map. I believe there are lots of LNWR maps listed in the Bartholomew's printing record. And I have a suspicion looking at it that basically Bartholomew offered a range of base maps and said, which would you like for your base map? And the customer said, I'll go for that one, please. So in a sense, that the design process was a 2-stage one. There would often be an existing map and the railways would be added to it. And it might be an interesting exercise to try and work through your maps and sort out which ones you think might be 2-stage maps like that. The LMS one with hachures in brown, for example, struck me as the sort of thing that no one was ever going to do just for a railway map. And the Glen Eagles map might fall into the same category.
Can I just say, I mean, I noted down in my notes here that the Caledonian Railway timetable map was a McCorkadale production.
Right.
That's written on the map. I didn't, I had.
But you can still have the same process.
But yeah, but a lot of the maps, I mean, Bartholomew, especially in Scotland, it's not surprising. A lot of them came from some kind of Bartholomew base. On the Board of Trade, that's interesting what you say, Rob. I mean, I don't claim to have a great knowledge of the machinations of the Board of Trade behind it, but they are certainly interesting maps. And if you want, I can copy the area around Lincoln for you if you want and send it.
Please, yes,
yes, because I'm very happy to do that. Not tonight, perhaps. It's already 11:30 in Sofia, but maybe in the next couple of days I can send you a copy of that. And anyway, I'll send you something around Lincoln if that's of interest to you.
If I could add, Rob, I mean, you're right. It was a chaotic time that had the deadline of the 31st December 1845 to get your schemes in.
Was it December then? I thought it was September.
I thought it was the end of the year.
Oh, it
But anyway, it was
changed at
a
certain
date
times.
in 1845. They got
Yes.
swamped with schemes.
Mm.
They'd scrapped the previous way of filtering them, and I mean, you had to have somebody look at them, because other than that, you wouldn't have had parliamentary time on anything other than railways in the whole of 1846. But
Well, it
you're
was
right,
done by
it was
committees.
chaotic. Yeah,
So-
but they got swamped.
Yes, I mean
The previous setup that it had been changed, and there's a change just at the time when there's a peak activity.
Yes, but the committees sat in the temporary corrugated iron buildings that were there when the Palace of Westminster was being built.
Yeah.
And it's noted that it was a particularly hot summer, and the committee considering the Great Northern Scheme and one or two others, the room was incredibly hot and stuffy.
Just as the maps, not my copies of it, but the other later, slightly better produced copies are dated. I think it was sometime in April. The maps are dated April 1846, whatever that means. But that's when they were produced.
Yes, well, that's exactly the time that they would be needed to advise parliamentary discussion.
Yeah, I can check the date, but not instantly.
Okay, it fell a bit silent there. Let me get another chat in here, also from Peter Jones. He says another little-known fact re the Forth Bridge is that it's actually on a gradient. Although the OS do not show trig point levels, the north side is higher than the south. I dare say our experts knew that, but it gives me something to read.
I know the direction rather than the gradients of it.
Graham Collett says, many thanks for a great presentation, chaps. Any more questions for Stuart and Gilbert?
Well, I would like to join in on the LNER map of about 1948. The style of the map, straight lines, little circles for stations, and Gill's railway font. Well, the Dutch railways used that format for the whole time up to the 1990s. It must have been very popular because the Gill font is extremely pleasing and well readable, and the schematic of the map goes very well with the timetable. Just an idea was probably they took the LNER map as a base.
Interesting. I wasn't aware of that. There's certainly I think that the diagrammatic presentation works. What doesn't work is some of the random application of page numbers or
no.
Numbers.
In Holland they use table numbers.
LNER.
And the table numbers do not change with pages.
No.
That's Gill Sans, presumably, is it? The font? Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Michiel, and maybe see you soon. Any questions?
Yes. Sorry, I'll mute myself.
Any more questions?
Bear in mind that it's now 20 to 11 up here.
Yes, and what worries me in deepest Bulgaria is that Gilbert's about to turn.
That's another 2 hours extra.
He's about to turn into a vampire.
Yeah, precies.
Well, that's Romania.
Still Monday in Sofia.
If there are any more questions, please shout now or forever hold your peaces. Thank you so much, chaps. You've put in a heck of a lot of work there, and it's very much appreciated. And I shall send you one of those things that floats through the air in a minute, and you can clap yourselves. Thank you so much. 37 people as we started out, and most of them have continued to the very end. So it's obviously appreciated. There's a couple more comments still coming in. Andy says, thanks very much, superb. Peter Jones again says, could George Dow have been influenced by the Midland? There you go. Don't answer that. Next time. Next time. But thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I can't guarantee it, but I hope to be in a position to get another meeting, which is always popular with railway interests folk, at the show and tell at the Highgate. I nearly said Gatehouse. That's the theatre. The Woodman pub, right on top of Highgate High Level Station, and they've reopened the escalator, folks. It's only taken them a year, but we look forward to celebrating that. I'll let you know the date as soon as I can. It'll be in April, before the AGM, of course, which is, as you well know, organised by Rob. Thank you, Rob. On May the 16th, Saturday in Lincoln, and Rob's arranging something of great interest to you for the Friday as well. So once again, thank you, chaps. Thank you, Gilbert. Thank you, Stuart. And I hope that secret download of railway files I sent you and mustn't mention gets to you somehow. If it hasn't done it by tomorrow, let me know, and
it's okay. It seems to, yeah.
I'll send it again somehow.
Okay.
But thank you very much, and good night, everyone.